What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Fourth and Florida. Excited to be back with you guys to talk about the Power Four programs in the state of Florida, where we know football is big business down here. And we're like a week away from kickoff with Florida State in week 0. And then we got the rest of the season coming close. So we're giving you guys a preview of what to expect from these 4 teams coming into the season. Obviously, you have a representative here from Florida, Florida State, and UCF. We've been trying to get Miami to show up. Last weekend, they were rewinding their VHS highlight tape. I think it got caught in the VCR, so those guys are still trying to figure that out. Maybe we'll get them on at another later episode. So with that being said, we're going to dive right in. We're going to give some previews of what to expect from the defensive side of things. Last episode was the offense, guys. Make sure you go check that out. It's an episode you're not going to want to miss. And then we're going to give in our takes on who's going to have the best defense in the state, because, that's always a big talking point among these fan bases. So to start with, I'm going to throw it over to Daniel from the Gator Truth podcast to talk about Florida's defense. They kind of opted out of playing defense a little bit last year, 78th in scoring defense. Daniel, what's ahead for the Gators this year, and how are they going to get better on that side of the ball?
Well, I mean, what's the quote from Rogue One? Rebellions are built on hope. Well, that's exactly what the Florida defense is right now. But really, at the end of the season, Sean Spencer, Coach Chaos, as he was known, ended up being let go, as well as Corey Raymond, who was the defensive backs coach. Our main linebacker coach leaves as well. Ends up at Texas A&M, where he hires Coach Chaos. So we'll be interested to see them week 3. But with that said, and Raymond ends up at LSU. With that said, we pull in Will Harris, a former defensive back coach at Washington, had some great pass defenses there. Went to the NFL as an assistant defensive back coach. Comes back to the college ranks to be our defensive back coach for that D line. And of course, I want to forget the name off the top of my head because, we're live. Why not? But anyways, brought in a new defensive line coach and brought in for not just linebackers, but to be co-DC Ron Roberts, who was formerly at Auburn last year for whatever issues they had outside of, a few games, and that, of course, 4th and forever they gave up to Alabama. They were actually pretty good for a first-year program under Hugh Freeze, especially after, the chaos that was the whole Brian Harsin situation at Auburn. But with that said, you bring in Ron Roberts, who's a mentor to Austin Armstrong, our defensive coordinator, and you bring them in for the two of them to collaborate and help to bring Armstrong up to a Power 5 level. Also last year, tons of youth played. I mean, we had the most true freshmen, I believe, get defensive snaps in the nation, or the most freshmen overall. And hopefully this year, along with transfers, that helps us build into a better defense as well as the better coaching. For the defensive line, Justice Boone, who's a defensive end, we've got him back. He injured himself in the preseason last year in August. The Gators always seem to have at least one big injury in August, and that came this past week with one of our nose tackles, Jamari Lyons, ends up breaking his ankle out for the season. But luckily, the Gators have Cam Jackson, who last year was his first season at Florida, transferred in from Memphis, and Desmond Watson, who's a senior in his 4th year. Giant. You want to talk about a refrigerator of a guy. This guy, over 400 pounds, lost some weight going into the year, feels better. New strength and conditioning as well, which I think will help this defense. And as far as transfers for the defensive line, brought in Joey Slackman, who was a all-star for the Ivy League, playing for, I believe, Yale. And I'm probably going to mess that up. It's going to end up being Princeton or Harvard. I don't know why.
He's smart either way. Guy either way.
Ivy League guy, smart guy. And I don't know why I'm drawing blanks, but I'm here to admit that. Talked to him after the spring game. I said, "Are you the smartest guy on the team?" He didn't want to say yes, but you could kind of tell. But very, very nice guy from my interaction with him. The question I have is, will a step up from Ivy League competition to SEC competition, as well as, teams like Miami, Florida State, UCF. Very curious to see how he handles that step up. The reports that I've seen from fall practice are that it seems like he's going to be good to go, but you never know until you get into it. For example, a few years ago, Florida had a right tackle transfer in from Fordham, 2-time FCS All-American, and there's a highlight play for FSU. I won't tell you what year, so you don't go find it and play it on repeat during a future episode, but the defensive end from FSU knocks him 5 yards back, just runs into him and flies back. It's kind of crazy. So that's why I'm curious. Hopefully Slackman will not be like that, but I always, when I see FCS guys, have a little bit of that in my mind. But again, reports say he's doing well, so I'm hoping he'll do well. But last year, guys like Kelby Collins, TJ Searcy, Tyreek Sapp, Caleb Banks, younger guys that got lots of experience that we're hoping to turn around on that defensive line. For the linebacker position, Shamar James, who got injured last year in the latter part of the season, I believe he got injured against Georgia, tried to go a few extra games, did not work out well. Once we lost him, it really hurt the defense. He's in his third year now, started as a true freshman, got experience last year. I think he's going to be good to go. Pup Howard transfers in from South Carolina, played the last few games for them last year. Very high recruit. Hopefully he and Shamar help shore that up with better coaching and hopefully a little bit better tweaks to that scheme. And Derek Wingo, a senior who's been here since 2020, decently solid last year, but again, hoping to see them take the next step because the Gators defense has been bad since 2020. And then on the back end, I appeared on a few podcasts. My Dogs Are Barking, Mississippi State, and then also our Longhorn affiliate with the College Huddle. Both asked me, what are you most concerned about with the defense? And I said, right now it's a defensive backfield, not because it's not talented, but because we've got up to 2-3 new starters going into this defensive backfield. Jason Marshall was great as a cornerback for 2 straight years. In fact, didn't allow touchdowns first 2 years. Last year had a big step back. The question is, will Harris bring him back up to that form he was in the first 2 years? Devin Moore, other cornerback position, has been injured every season, so can't really catch a break. The question is he going to be able to play all 12 games? And hopefully he will. But again, there's a question to be asked about his durability. Sharif Denson, true sophomore, probably taking the star. And then at the safeties, true sophomore Jordan Castell, another one of the true freshmen that played on defense last year, and you're hoping to leverage their experience as freshmen into experience or into big gains on defense. He's probably going to start. We also brought in transfers at the safety position, Asa Turner from Washington, who had former experience with Harris his freshman and sophomore year. Last year started for the Huskies all the way up until that national title game. We also brought in DJ Douglas, and who transferred in after being a starter for a pretty good Tulane team. And then also have Bridges, who transferred in from Oregon, as well as another freshman from last year that got lots of experience, Bryce Thornton. So again, very experienced group, but a group that has not worked together much at all. And then also the questions of like the durability of more. But to go back to why will we be better than 79th? And that's just leveraging all the youth from last season into new experience and bringing in a lot of experienced guys or guys with a lot more potential plus experience, like a Pup Howard or an Asa Turner or a DJ Douglas. So with that said, I really hope this turns into a top 40 defense. I do believe if it gets to the top 40 range, of course we want it better, but if you can get to the top 40, I do think the Gators have a shot at winning 7-8 games. But again, we'll have to see how it works out.
Yeah,
All right.
you guys have some tough offenses there too. I mean, that you guys are going to face this year, and I did hear about the Washington transfer. I think that was a big time addition for you guys. Obviously Washington didn't have a great defense, but I mean, you get an experienced guy who was on a team that played for the national championship, and I think Florida does have some tools to get better. I think it's interesting the way you guys have that absolutely massive defensive line, and I mean, I don't know how it's worked out, but you guys got a couple of grown behind men up there pushing that 300-400 range. So we'll have to see how it works out. We'll give some follow up with UF's defense here in a second, but we're going to switch spots and talk about the UCF defense this year and what these guys are going to be able to do. Scoring defense last year was 61st, first year at the Power 5, and you got some adjustments to do. We'll let you fill us in on that. Top 25 pass defense. I mean, you can't ask for, doing better than that your first year in the Big 12. 100 and they're not 150 teams in Division I, so 125th in run defense. Let us know what we can look forward to with the Knights defense this year, and then how they're going to shore up that run defense.
All right. So unlike the University of Florida, which I heard you, Daniel, say hope is not a strategy for UCF. So for us, we Gus Malzahn went into the offseason angry, and rightfully so. It's the first time he'd ever had a losing season. Now, during the season, it was 6-6, but with the bowl game, it was 6-7. And a large reason for that was our rush defense. Unexpectedly, we talked about last week how the Big 12 was a big running league as opposed to the traditional air raid style that we're used to. And unfortunately, we had Taj Brooks and a little certain somebody with Ollie Gordon as the name in our league. So we actually shut down Ollie Gordon last year, which was the one game that we had a great, great defensive effort. But, to your point, for us, it was about the linebacking core. Our linebacking core was not very strong. We had a really good secondary. We bring back a lot of those guys and actually added to it. The linebacking core has been solidified, and we'll talk a little bit more about the detail there. And we've got more depth along the defensive line as well. So overall, we've brought 40 new players to the team this year. Most of the transfers have come in through the linebacking and defensive backs. Although we had a strong defensive back core last year, 8 of the players that we brought in were actually defensive backs. So there's a lot of change, but more importantly, a lot of depth, a lot of experience, and a lot of star power as compared to what we had before. So there's high expectations in UCF land about in the kingdom, as we like to say, regarding the defense. The other major change really was bringing in a new defensive coordinator. We had a first-year defensive coordinator last year who showing a lot of promise. He's going to be a great defensive coordinator, in the future, but he wasn't one last year. He showed why he was a first-year defensive coordinator. So this wasn't someone who you would traditionally see that went through the G5 leagues and then came up to a Power 5 school or Power 4 school. This was someone who went directly from an assistant role into a head coaching role. So our defense was really vanilla last year, right? Very simple, very basic. Wasn't a lot of movement. We weren't disguising blitzes. We didn't get a lot of turnovers. So the focus this year was bringing in someone who was very, very seasoned as far as a defensive mind, and that was Ted Roof. And fun fact, this is actually Ted Roof's second stint at UCF, although the first stint was probably about a month and a half, and then he took another job. So Ted Roof came into the program, and it was all about being aggressive, making sure we had the right players. And so all accounts, just from an attitude perspective, is that this defense and these players have been a lot more aggressive. They're hitting a lot harder. We had guys bouncing off of offensive players and running backs last year. Our linebackers weren't scraping, so they weren't filling gaps. So this has been a big improvement. So kind of detailing that a little bit, on defensive end, we bring back Malachi Lawrence, which we had Tremon Morris-Brash last year, who was a senior and with UCF the entire time, a rarity these days, was the top defensive end in the Big 12 last year. So we do lose some there. Malachi Lawrence, big 4-star. He was playing, he was a freshman last year, had a lot of sacks last year. And and played really, really well. Big expectations for him. The second defensive end looks like it's going to be Caven Call as it stands right now. Caven Call, again, another 4-star defensive end that we brought in, who's getting a lot of playing time this year and is expected to start opposite of Malachi Lawrence. That being said, we do have a wild card, and that wild card is Nigel Kelly, who, if you remember, was one of the top recruits for Miami last year, got injured and had to sit out the season and is now playing for us. All the word out of camp is he's catching on to the defense pretty well. He was a fall camp add-on, but is starting to understand the playbook, et cetera. So he's going to push those two guys for that starting spot. And then we also have Dalen Dotson as the other part of that 2-deep rotation for the defensive end, who was also senior. He was a transfer and was very, very well regarded at his previous school and very highly rated. Going to the middle of the line, one of our core strengths this year, defensive tackle. So we bring back Ricky Barber, who did really, really well. He was a transfer from, I believe, an FCS school the previous year, but was a All-American at that FCS school and then played really well for us, but then got injured and was out for most of the season. Along with him, we have Lee Hunter, who was the top defensive tackle in the country last year. And Lee Hunter was a transfer from Alabama. His freshman year, so he was with us last year and coming back for this year. He's expected to potentially go to the NFL draft as a junior after this season as a junior. Massive human being, violent off of the line, and really, really good player. Alongside him, we have John Walker. And for those of you that are Gator faithful, should be familiar with John Walker, because a couple years ago we were in a recruiting battle for John Walker with the Gators. In fact, there was a video of when he made his announcement, and there was some Gator journalists there who was really, really upset and kind of threw a tantrum at his house where he was holding the signing ceremony, but was our top rated player that we signed ever in UCF history until the next year. And now, again, we have another one this year. And then we have a borderline 5-star that recently flipped from Alabama, is committed for 2026. So I have a feeling that's not always going to be the case, but very, very solid player, good size, good instincts, and should be very disruptive in defensive tackle. So between those three, we've got a solid rotation. And then we've got some good Matthew Alexander, who did really well last year as well. Junior guy who's coming in that will spell them as well. So we have depth. I think it was last year, because we lost Ricky Barber, Lee Hunter played every snap on defense the entire season.
Tough.
That's tough from an injury perspective, and that's a big guy to ask to do that game in and game out. So really excited about that. Linebackers, which is the biggest area of improvement where we actually have depth now. We got Ethan Barr, who transferred to us. He was originally going to be transferring, I believe it was to Maryland. It was Maryland somewhere. He was following his coach. He was a very highly touted linebacker out of Vandy, and that ended up coming to UCF. Very experienced, highly ranked defensively, difference maker, very smart, senior, and he knows the defense. And by all accounts at camp, he was a captain on his previous team. He's a captain as soon as he transferred here, and is making a huge difference for the linebacking core. We also have Pace, and some of you may be familiar with Mr. Pace, as he was on that, along with Byron Threats, was on that Cincinnati playoff team and was the talk of the town defensively, and is playing for us this year in linebacker, and by all accounts is doing a really good job. Now, he's a guy who is a safety / linebacker, can be played in multiple spots, but looks like he's going to be sitting in the linebacker spot, and by all accounts is picking up well. We also have Andrew Harris, who was a 4-star last year, that is supposedly doing really well in camp, and a guy by the name of Pierre, who's coming in, who was also highly touted transfer. So lots of lots of senior. This is a senior laden team, a very upperclassman focused team that's filling a lot of the gaps and are larger. These guys are larger. They know they know what they're doing, and they're not having to learn on the fly. So expect a lot out of that group. Finally, in defensive backs, you've got Antoine Jackson. Now, I don't know if that rings a bell for you guys, but last year he was a very highly rated 4-star that went to ECU of all places, and everybody was kind of questioning and looking around like this is a guy that was Georgia was trying to recruit, and Florida was trying to recruit, and everybody was trying to recruit. And everybody was like, he went to ECU of all places, or EZU as we like to call it. So turns out that he had a girlfriend on the team. So she transferred to UCF because he wanted to transfer to UCF, and he is blowing it out at camp. And along with him, you've got Brandon Adams. And this is an insane stat. 15% success rate against Brandon Adams all season long when he was targeted. That's Revis Island by definition. So that's a guy who can shut down that portion of the field. At quarterback 2, you've got cornerback 2. You've got Mac McWilliams and Chasen Johnson, both guys. Chasen Johnson, 4-star guy, who coming out of camp is another shutdown guy. You've got Fegans, who transferred in, and at nickel, we've got Braden Marshall, who was a 4-star freshman last year, highly touted 4-star freshman that was choosing between us and North Carolina, played all of last season and is coming back to play again this season. So for the cornerbacks, again, defensive backs, we're solid there. And at safety, we've got, we have Quadric Bullard, who was last year's safety, came back, is doing really well. Tennyson and Damari. And all of those guys have played well. Damari was a 4-star recruit that came in, played well last year, and again was expected to play this year. And then for backup safety, we have Byron Threats. So the thing that's going to be interesting there is if he makes it into the rotation, because he was one of the top safeties in the country for the last 2 years running. And I think he's going to crack that as well. So bottom line is we have a lot of position battles that are still going on across the defense. They're more aggressive. And from what I understand and what I've watched, the defensive fronts that we're playing, we're disguising, we're scheming, and there's a real big focus on turnovers, which we didn't have last year. If everybody can read what you're doing, you're not going to get a lot of turnovers. So we have the ability with our linebackers and the defensive backs to come at you from anywhere. So there's an expectation that this is at least a top 40 defense for the year. So paired with a top 10 offense should make for a good season.
I love it, man. And it sounds like really, and this is something that we've talked about on our show a lot, is I think the transfer portal has been good for the game. And a lot of times you see that the best way to say it is like the peanut butter spread more evenly across the toast. You know what I mean? I think you see teams like UCF now getting these and that's not a dish at UCF, but you see these teams that were maybe at the group of 5 level that are finding their ways to climb that ladder of upper echelon teams that are getting these Alabama transfers, that are getting these big name transfers that can help bolster your defense while you're building up recruiting, which is what you're saying. Sounds like they're doing very well on the trail, and they're getting those big guys. And I mean, as much as you can say it's the X's and the O's, it's still to a degree the Jimmys and the Joes. You know, you got to have the dudes, and it sounds like UCF is really doing a good job of getting dudes in there, and that should make a big difference for you guys for sure.
Size difference at the linebacking core specifically. I mean, you guys were going from 6 foot, 215 to 220 guys to 6'3", 240 guys. And that's a huge difference when you're talking about playing big boy football, right? And UCF's always been a really good transfer destination for folks. And we kind of lived off of that. But what was going to be interesting for us and what we were worried about, quite frankly, was what was going to happen to those transfers? Were we going to, when you can just transfer year to year, there was some thoughts and concerns about whether that would be good for UCF or bad, where you start picking up people who just up and leave and go to, an Alabama or something, or transfer back. And it turned out for UCF, it's been a net positive for sure.
Yeah, and I think when I think back to Florida State around 2011, 2012, when we kind of came out of that lost decade, even recently, you would just see the team on the field and you're like, okay, we're going to be better because we look like a major college football team now. We don't look undersized. And that size just makes such a big difference. Like you said, especially when you're at the Power 4 level now, not Power 5 anymore. But, that size makes a big difference because you just, you're getting run over sometimes, or there's guys that they are just limited. They're great scheme guys, but they may be limited by their physical ability. And I think when you get that better level athletes, man, it just makes it so much easier to do everything. So looking at Florida State's defense, I am really excited for this defense this year. And I know that there's a lot of talk about how much we lost. That's really been the narrative with Florida State on both sides of the ball. And I think with the offense, you have a lot of question marks of what guys are going to be. I think the defense, there's just less question marks. Like when you look at this team coming into the season, now we've fixed some things at linebacker, thank goodness. But I think now coming towards the end of fall camp, you really can't find a weakness on this defense. I feel like everything is at least average to above average, if not really good. And I think that's exciting. And when you look at Florida State, the last 2 years, they put together a top 20 scoring defense, allowed less than 20 points a game last year. If you adjust for the insane bowl debacle there, it comes down to actually around 16 points a game, which would have been, I think, a 7th in the country or something like that. So by all means, the defense has gotten really good as they've gotten Jimmys and Joes. That's been a big part of it. I mean, there was...
Or UCF Knights.
You need them. You got to have them.
Certain linebackers that you guys got last year.
Jaden Bethune was a great help for our defense at a position of need, and so he was really big for us. Unfortunately, he's gone now. I wish he could be back for another year. But, man, I just think when you look at this defense, Adam Fuller has earned some respect as defensive coordinator. A lot of people wanted him fired. I know things were kind of rough to begin with, but he took over not the greatest situation. We had a couple of stars with like a Jermaine Johnson and a Jamie Robinson that were literally carrying the whole defense. But I think the thing that stands out to me with the coaching was last year, the adjustments were next level. I mean, there was times where we would be a little sketchy in the first half, but then the second half, man, they would just lock it down. I think they actually even maybe held Florida to negative yards in the fourth quarter or the second half or something like that. It was, I mean, that in the Louisville game where the best performances I've seen from a defense in a long time. Unfortunately, our coaching staff remains the same, but we lost a pretty good bit of guys on that defense. I mean, you lose, obviously, Jared Verse is the first name that comes to your mind. Braden Fisk, that's a tough guy to replace. You lost a couple of depth guys in the middle. You lost Fabian Lovett, who was a big-time starter for you. We lost both linebackers to the NFL. That's tough, too. You lose a couple of NFL guys out of the secondary. So there's a lot to replace. But I think they've done a really, really good job on the defensive side of the ball. If you start with the front seven, I think when you look at the interior group, the top two guys get you really excited. I mean, you have Daryl Jackson, who is, unfortunately had to sit out last year. I think he was like the only player in the NCAA that they made sit out for a season due to the transfer rule, and now they don't even have that rule anymore. And then you also have Josh Farmer next to him, and this is a really big developmental guy for us. Came in as like a 240-pound linebacker. Now he's over 300 pounds. But when you look at these two guys, they both made Bruce Feldman's college football freaks list. One of them, Josh Farmer, is 6'3", 318, second team All-ACC selection last year. Daryl Jackson is 6'5", 330 pounds. Both of them have around 700 to 800 snaps of experience. I'm really excited about that interior group. It's when you get past them that I'm a little bit worried about. I think that is one of our weakest places is depth at the defensive tackle. We brought in a guy like Grady Kelly, who from Colorado State has over 1,000 snaps. I just wasn't really feeling it in the spring game performance. Maybe there's some things to step up. We got some young guys that are going to step in. We also have a defensive end that has a lot of size at 6'4", 280 that's going to be kind of sliding inside to help us out there. The thing is with Florida State that's interesting too is last year they implemented a new strategy where Mike Norvell looked at a lot of the top programs from around the country and how heavily they rotated. And so we rotated a ton last year. I don't think any of the guys played over 50% of the snaps. So I think that helps build the depth with the young guys going into this year. You got a lot of guys with playing time. At defensive end, I mean, last year it's hard to lose a guy like Jared Verse, but I think you really have an embarrassment of riches at defensive end for FSU this year. I mean, to start with, you have Patrick Payton, who was the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year 2 years ago, 6'5", 254, almost 1,000 snaps of experience. Actually, I saw this stat the other day of defensive ends that had over a 500 snap count last year. He actually had a higher havoc rate than Jared Verse did. So this is a guy that he's projected as a first to second round NFL draft pick. And then you have Sione Loholeha, who also came over with the DJU from Oregon State. He was a second team all Pac-12 player there last year, 6'3", 260. I think he will be probably your starter there at the other defensive end. And then, of course, you have Marvin Jones Jr., guy that comes in from Georgia, former 5-star. So, I mean, you just, again, you name it, you got it at defensive end. Byron Turner Jr. is another guy that played 300 snaps last year. Tamiwa Durajaye. But we got, that's how we're going to be good this year, because we got a lot of players that got hard names to pronounce. Tamiwa Durajaye comes in from West Virginia. And this is just a bull in the china shop type of guy. Got size and just explosiveness, but he's got to figure out the technician part of it. And so I think this is going to be he's the guy that can play on the defensive end side. He's also a guy who can slide down inside and help us at defensive tackle. So I'm excited about him as well. Now, when you slide past the defensive line, and again, I think that defensive line is going to be great. I mean, they averaged over 40 sacks the last 2 years. So they've been great in the pressure department. When you go back and look at linebacker, this coming into the season was probably our biggest glaring weakness. We had DJ Lundy actually entered the portal at one point. We were able to bring him back out of the portal, which was huge for this defense. He was actually Pro Football Focus's number 2 graded linebacker against the run, so that should help as well. And then I think to really plug the hole there was getting Cam Riley from Auburn. This is a guy, first off, at 6'5", 242 pounds. That is immense size for a linebacker. So I'm really excited to have him. And from what they say in fall camp, he has just really been that guy. You know what I mean? He has been the guy to step up at linebacker and really do things for us on this defense. But I do think that when you look at the linebacker, once you get past those top 2 guys, I think you have a little bit of concern for your depth there. Now, you have young guys who are talented. You got a guy, Juice Cryer, who is what we talked about earlier, a scheme guy who may be limited a little bit by his athletic ability, but I think he's going to be a contributor this year. Blake Nicholson, another young guy who just maybe needs another season of development. But the good thing for Florida State is we run a 4-2-5 defense primarily. And so I think you can kind of get away with a little thin depth at linebacker. But I feel 1,000 times better than I did in the spring about the linebacker position. And then when you look at the secondary, Florida State, man, for what I got to hand it to them with Florida State's pass defense, it has been really, really good. 11th in 2023, 4th in 2022. And then you look at what they lost. They did lose Renardo Green at the corner who went to the NFL, and Jerryon Jones, who had a great season last year. But you also bring in a guy, Azareye'h Thomas, who's a starting corner for us. I feel like Mike Norvell feels like, a lot of people feel like this is an All-American type guy. I mean, I hate to put these expectations on him. There's a lot of Jalen Ramsey comparisons being thrown around for this kid, and I think he's played a lot since he was a true freshman. He kind of lived with some of the growing pains, and now it's his time to step into that role. Fentrell Cypress on the other side came in from Virginia a year ago. He's not perfect, but he's dang on steady. You can rely on him out there. I think another year in the system will do him some good. We've heard really good stuff out of fall camp. Looking at safety, you have Shaheem Brown, who is the leader on the backside of that defense, will now be going into year 3 as a starter. Again, great camp reports from him. The 2 positions that are still kind of waiting to be sorted out are the other safety spot opposite of Shaheem Brown. You have a guy there where we have about 3 or 4 guys that are in the running. You have Conrad Hussey, a talented young freshman. That's kind of my vote. You bring Amarion Cooper back from Colorado, who transferred out of Florida State. You have Kevin Knowles, another guy who moved over from corner. And then we have Devontae Brown, which is, I believe, that's Damari's brother. If that's the one you're talking about, that's at UCF. They both went to Miami. They saw it was a dumpster fire, and they both got out of town. So we have 3 or 4 guys there. And then your nickel slot is still the one that I believe it's going to be Earl Little Jr. coming in from Alabama that's going to start there. And I'm excited about that guy as well. So, I mean, really, again, I think Florida State did lose a lot of their big pieces on defense. You may not have as many stars this year, but I do think that this is going to be a really good defense again. I mean, I'm looking for them to be top 25 again, maybe even a little bit higher than that. But I do think it's worth mentioning that I've been working on our defensive preview. And we have a tougher slate of offenses this year. Last year, our average defensive rank that we faced was 68th. We had a lot of year one quarterbacks, one top 25 defense, 3 in the top 50. This year, that average jumps up to 39th, 4 defenses in the top 25, 7 in the top 50, and a lot of returning quarterbacks. So they're going to need it this year. They're going to be put to the test. But man, there's some question marks on offense, like I said, but on defense, I really like this defense. I think they can take it to the bank this year, and I think it will be our strength. I think while the offense gets their footing going in these first couple of games, I think we're going to be relying on defense and special teams to really keep us in games. But, I mean, I couldn't be more excited about another year with this defense. We got some stars on this defense, I feel like, and we have better depth than we did last year. You may not have as much high-end guys, but I think your depth is a little bit better other than defensive tackle.
So, Jesse, I'm just going to interject here because I have an answer to a question you asked, which is I'm not sure why the defense was, a little bit softer in the first half and then came on strong in the second half. And it's actually because of someone, I have a feeling it's because of someone that has had time at the Florida Gators, at the UCF Knights, and now with Florida State. And his name is Randy Shannon. So we called him second half Randy, lazy Randy, because it was the same thing at UCF. I'm not even joking. It was literally when Randy Shannon was there, the first half of defensive football was not great. And then all of a sudden we found a defense in the second half. So either he's great at doing adjustments and terrible at game planning, or there's something going on there because it was 100% the same way at UCF.
Well, our biggest beef with Randy has always been recruiting, but I think he's actually a pretty decent on-field coach. He is our co-DC, so that may have something to do with the first to second half adjustments. I do think there are some things that went into last year where, like in the first half on third downs, you may have a freshman playing, and you're like, what the heck are we doing? But they always talk about how it's a 4-quarter game, and you're playing for all 4 quarters. You're not trying to kind of spend yourself in that first half. But, it would be nice to see them not being so tight in the first half of games where maybe they shouldn't have to be, just given the way that they were able to tighten down the second half. But, overall, I think it will still be a pretty good defense. And hopefully Randy can wake up and go recruit us some good linebackers, because we kind of need that as well. But I will say, at least from that perspective, I do think having the assistants, or not the assistants, the analysts now able to coach on the field, I do think that is going to help as well, because our linebackers assistant is actually Ernie Sims, who, if you're familiar with football in the state of Florida, you probably at least recognize that
Ernie
name.
Sims.
Yeah, so that was a huge kind of piece unlocked. We're kind of like, can we just slide him on the field and maybe slide Randy off the field,
Well, I can tell you this. I know you coming out of UCF camp, everybody, both on the defensive and offensive side of the ball, have said that that's a big boom, because before you had to, you couldn't talk to the players and coach them up. You had to tell the DC or whoever was the designated coaches on the field, and it slows it down. And when you add on the fact that now we're going to have headsets within the helmets, that speeds it up even more. Although it's going to be limited to who can talk to the player. For us, it's going to be the middle linebacker, Ethan Barr, that will have that. But it just speeds up that coaching, and with that, plus the we keep saying, Gus Malzahn keeps saying iPads, but they're actually Microsoft Surfaces, so I'm not going to make that mistake. With those displays there on the screen, they're going to be able to make coaching adjustments on the screen, and being able to do that with the team, I think that is going to make a huge difference, and certainly help the brand of football. I will say this, Jesse, you are not going to know what kind of defense you have until you get to SMU and Clemson, because you play Georgia Tech, which has a pretty good. They did pretty well the season last year, right?
I think they're going to be. That offense is legit.
Well, that's another former UCF coach from that 2015 team, Brent Key, who challenged the fan base during that season to show up at his office at 4 a.m. if they had anything to say about the performance of the team. And that's direct quote. But then you've got Boston College, you've got Memphis, you've got Cal. So those 3 teams, Boston College, by the way, led by another former UCF backup quarterback as well. So lots of UCF ties here, more so than I even thought about until I started going through these. But I don't think you're going to know how good of a how good of a defense you're going to have until a little later on in the season. And especially I'd like to see how Mac Brown and UNC does this year. That's going to be an interesting storyline for me.
Yeah, and see, I would almost go the opposite of that. I think we're not going to find out who our offense is until later in the season because we play a lot of the worst defenses start. All those are like the 90s and whatnot. But when you look at those first offenses, man, I mean, Georgia Tech averaged over 31 points a game last year. They returned basically everybody from that team. You also have, I mean, they were right up there with the highest team in yards per play against Georgia's defense last year. And then you also, I mean, Memphis's offense, they don't play defense worth a flip, but their offense is pretty good. Their quarterback is legit. He's a 4-year starter there. SMU, you know, they're a Jekyll and Hyde when it comes to Power 5 versus non-Power 5, but they're a pretty legitimate offense. Cal, I think I will say, is the one that maybe looks the worst. But the thing about Cal, man, is they might have one of the best running backs in the country in Jaden Ott. I gave him my all ACC vote. I mean, that kid is legit. I don't know how you say that.
I would put 3 running backs ahead of him, and they're all in the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I'm not saying
Ollie
he's not.
Gordon, Taj, and then RJ Harvey.
Well, if there's only 3 running backs better than you in the entire country, then you're doing pretty good. I mean, he ran for almost 1,400 yards and missed time in 3 games last year, so he's pretty good. But again, I don't know that they got a pass offense to go with it. And then I will say too, as far as Boston College, man, Castellanos, I'm really interested to see what he can do. He tore our behind up last year. Now, our defense, we had the flu and there's some other things going on there, so I don't know if that played a difference into it, but that kid can be special. I mean, he is, I don't know if he's got the pieces around him to do it, but he's a game changer for that offense. So I think there's enough tricky stuff. And like, actually, you talk about the Clemson, that's one of the probably worst offenses on our schedule, just from a dysfunction standpoint.
They were last year. I think Dabo, obviously we talked about before that you lose some offensive coaching talent, and you obviously lost it for a reason. I think Dabo takes that back over and gets them to right the ship. As far as Tommy Castellanos is concerned, that was the aforementioned quarterback that was a UCF backup quarterback. And when he was recruited, the good thing about Tommy Castellanos is he's fleet with his feet. Right. So he can hurt you with his feet. Last year, if you watched him play, he's got he's spinning a good deep ball, but it wasn't consistent. So if he can put those 2 pieces together, then he is going to be a threat because he pretty much put BC on his back. The games that they did win, by and large, were not against the upper echelon of ACC defenses. So if he can take a step forward, I think that will be a big deal for them. And they also had a former UCF wide receiver on their team as well. So they are the UCF North, I guess, or
maybe
attempting to be. I don't know.
Yeah, I just think, man, like, and this isn't the BC Talk pod, but I do think, like, yeah, you're right. He is a legs first guy, and it's just finding consistency through the air and then having the pieces around him, because I just don't think the receivers are going to be there this year. But, I mean, he's enough that, Lamar Jackson doesn't have to throw the ball to hurt you. He could probably run triple option and still end up beating some teams. So it's going to be interesting. I think our schedule, and I know we'll get into this in the next episode when we do win-loss predictions, I think our schedule is a little bit harder than people think, just from the offenses that are on there. Phil Steele has it ranked as 12th in the country, and he does a little bit more than just based on win-loss percentages, which is what I like, that he kind of does it more based on your roster and veterans and stuff like that. But getting back to the state of Florida. Now, I know both of you guys kind of said you have goals to be top 40. That would be awesome, right? That's kind of where we're hoping to be. So, Daniel, let me kick it back to you real quick. Looking at, you guys got some tough offenses on the schedule, obviously. And then you said you got some hope as the strategy, which we had defined as not necessarily a strategy.
Well, to clarify on that, it's because Florida fans have been saying since 2020, there's no way it gets, no way it could be worse than last year. And somehow, like I'm a big Office fan, and Stanley has a rant in the office one time towards Michael where he's like, every time I come in here, you have a stupid idea. I think there's no way you can top it. And what do? You find a way to top it. And I won't include the expletive that is in there. But that's generally the Gators defense on paper. Should we be a lot better this year through the transfers, through that? Yes. But until we see it based off of what we've seen, it's a question mark for me. Very much in the prove it or lose it.
Well, let me ask you this then. You said you guys are hoping to be top 40. What has to happen for that Gator defense to get into the top 40 this season?
Pass rush. And pass rush and turnovers. Last year, I think we had 2, maybe 3 interceptions the entire year. I know 3 would be the high there. Very few fumble recoveries and very few sacks. Even when we got QB pressures, for example, KJ Jefferson in that infamous Arkansas game, there are times we got into the backfield, hit him, didn't take him down, and then now he's either running for a first down or he's doing whatever. And, of course, FSU back in 2022, we win that game if we could wrap up Jordan and Travis, but twice – 4 or 5 guys miss it. And so actually I'm going to change this to tackling. 4 or 5 guys miss Jordan Travis on 2 separate times on 3rd, 4th down, back at like the 30. And then he runs and ends up being called down at like the 1 foot line or something, arguably touchdowns. And we've been poor tackling. Now, rumors out of camp, we've done a lot better tackling. But we need that pass rush, and we need to be getting the turnovers that we didn't get last year, along with the tackling. I know I said I'd replace it, but it's probably an add-on, because if you can take it from, I believe it was 20% missed tackles, down to 10%, major upgrade right there. I mean, heck, our Kentucky loss, we couldn't tackle Ray Davis, for anything. Dude ends up going off very early, very much on us, get way behind, can't come back.
Daniel, are you saying that tackling is the key for UF to be on the road to Omaha? I mean, I'm just saying. No, obviously that's baseball, but for success for football, I think is tackling, and that was the same thing for UCF. I mean, it was guys that when it came to size and when it came to filling gaps, it's just getting that guy down on the first contact. And, to your point, Jesse, I think that's a big part of our success, and specifically with the linebackers and safeties.
Yep. So give me real quick. We'll go hurry up defense here, if that's even a thing. Roger, give me the keys. How does UCF get in the top 40 this year in defense?
All right. So keys for UCF defense is consistent linebacker play, number one, and consistent pressure from the defensive tackles. I think our DBs are solid. And the second key for me would be that Ted Roof's defense sticks. So these guys, we do have it's a senior laden team. They have got up to speed. They're not learning the defense as much because they are juniors and seniors. So they've said, hey, this camp has been a lot faster in what they've been able to install. And they're not thinking about what they have to do, despite it being a new defensive coordinator, because these are all senior laden teams. So as long as I think we're solid in defensive backs. I think linebacker room, we've got some depth. So as long as we get pressure, and we've had a lot of close games. The third key is last year we had a lot of close games. We need to get 1 or 2 turnovers, preferably at least 1 turnover per game, because in the Big 12, the schools are really, really even as far as competition is concerned. It's not like the ACC, where, you've got FSU and maybe UNC and Clemson and everybody else. So, for us, that key is going to be to get that turnover to make sure that we're making the difference in those close games.
Yeah, and I would say for Florida State, I think really to be that top 25 caliber defense that we expect is just, one, we're going to have to stay healthy. I think that's key. And then the thing I just want to see them improve on is run defense. Now, last year, we were the 11th ranked pass defense, 72nd in the run defense, 4th in 2022, 75th. So, I mean, it's got to get better. That part I would like to see get better. But, I mean, they were pretty much good everywhere else. So you just have to be able to continue that. They've been good at pressure. They've been good at third downs. Red zone defense could see some improvement there as well, but they've done well with holding a lot of teams to field goals. So we'll do a quick, just down and dirty on Miami's defense from what I know off the top of my head, and then we'll get into ranking the defenses as we close this out. So last year's scoring defense, Miami comes in 44th. They did face 3 top 25 scoring offenses in which they gave up over 34 or averaged 34 points a game. I think A&M put up like 33 on them. UNC put up like 41 on them. So against the better defenses, they kind of did have a little bit of struggle there. Now, they were 55th in pass defense, 12th in run defense. I'll be honest, as much as we hate Miami, they got a pretty good defensive line. I will give them that. So I think when you look at Miami, they do lose some pieces up front, but they are really banking on a strong defensive line. You got Ruben Bain there at defensive end. That is their guy. I mean, he is highly touted recruit, comes in with a lot of hype, had a good season last year. But you did lose some guys on the interior. You lost Leonard Taylor, you lost Branson Dean, you lost Jafari Harvey, and a bunch of backups. So your depth there may not be the best, but they have some horses up there on that defensive line. At linebacker, again, they do bring back the Maui Noah guy, who is very good. That's an all-ACC first-teamer there. They do lose their nickel back, and then they also lose a couple of other guys, but they have some guys that have some experience there. They bring in a transfer from Louisville as well. Linebacker is somewhere that has typically been decent for Miami. Now on the back end, that's where it's going to be interesting with Miami. Obviously, we know they didn't do really good in the past last year. They do lose both safeties, James Williams and Cam Kinchins. They also lose some guys out wide. They lost a couple of their corners as well. Let's see. They did add some transfers, but they don't have the depth that they had last year, and they don't have some of their big guys. I mean, they were really high on those safeties, and they kind of underperformed last year. So it's going to be interesting to see Miami. I mean, I think they feel like they got a really hot offense this year. Of course, they got Cam Ward, the good running back, Martinez, and a good offensive line. But is that defense going to kind of let them down a little bit this year? It remains to be seen. But, I mean, they have talent. I'll give them that. They have talent on that side of the ball. It's just what they can do with it.
They always win the offseason.
Exactly.
I mean, that nobody ever doubts that Miami has talent. It's just, to your point, what they do with it.
Exactly.
And they haven't done much for a long time.
Exactly. They always have the talent. It's never been a talent issue. It's just been whether they take advantage of that talent or not. But they have the potential to be pretty good. They also don't have a tough schedule. They didn't really have a super tough schedule last year either as far as offenses go. Again, only 3 in the top 25. But let's transition into, as we get ready to close this out, now that we kind of got up the skinny on Miami anyway, let's see who we think are going to be the best defenses in the state. And I'll kick things off. I think it's going to be Florida State this year with the best defense. I know we have a much tougher offensive slate this year, but I just really like the talent that we've brought in. I think we got to stay healthy to do it. I think we are a little bit thin at defensive tackle and linebacker, but other than that, I mean, like I said, I just cannot find much of a weakness for this defense. I think I'm going to put Miami at 2 just from a talent perspective and knowing that they don't have a ton of tough offenses. I know they play Florida State this year, and our offense may not be as good as it was last year. And I think they got Virginia Tech, who's got a pretty decent offense with Kyron Drones there, but not the toughest schedule. I like what you told me about UCF. I think you already have one side of the field locked down with your pass defense. It's just fixing that other side. So I would go with UCF at number 3. And again, of course, like you said, you got really tough rushing offenses there to go against. So obviously you would expect that to lag on the passing side. And then Florida, sorry guys, I'm going to have to put you down at the bottom of the totem pole there. But I think Florida, you bring in experienced transfers, and I think that makes a big difference. Look at us. We basically rebuilt our team on experienced transfers. I mean, you guys also, I know you lost the kid, the interior defensive lineman, but you guys have massive size on that interior defensive line. And sometimes it's just hard to move guys that are pushing 400 pounds. So I am going to put Florida at number 4. And again,
sometimes
yeah, I mean,
I'm not moving anybody. Listen, when I was at peak playing weight, I was not moving anybody with 400 that was 400 pounds.
Maybe with my SUV or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Hook up a trailer to them or a tow hook and have at it.
Yeah, Florida's just also they got some tough offenses on the schedule this year too, so that's going to be a big factor. But
hold on, you mean they have a tough schedule?
Yeah, well, I know Daniel hates.
First I've heard of it.
I know he hates when we bring that up, but seven teams in the top preseason top 25 on that schedule. That no favors being done for old Billy. And the
I think it's
there.
8.
Is it 8?
I could be wrong.
Oh man, well 7 or 8, it's still kind of rough. But Daniel, go ahead and give us your defensive rankings within the state of Florida for the season of 2024.
All right, I'm probably going to go number 1, Miami, just because of who they've brought in and they're solid. I'll go with you guys for number 2. I mean, until you drop for sure, I'm going to hold it there again, partially because I need to see it for Florida after years of, it's going to happen and it not happening.
Yeah.
But I will go with Florida for number 3 because I'm not going to put us last. I'll admit my homerism, but I do think that a lot of the youth pays off for us. My question for UCF in a top 5 passing offense last year, when you're 125th rushing, why pass the ball if they can't stop the run? How much is that, does one affect the other? So we will see. I mean, they did bring in some good guys, get more stuff. So we'll see how they end up in year 2 in the Big 12. But again, I admit to my homerism sometimes when picking these things. So come at me if you will.
That's all fair. Right. You can chomp if you want to, and that's all right. That being said, for UCF, so and just in general, right? So I agree with Miami right now. They've proved it until they lose it. I'm a really big fan of their defensive coordinator, Lance Guidry. He actually came from Marshall, for people that don't know that, in 2022, and had 15 players with 10.5, 9.5, 8.5 tackles for a loss while he was at Marshall. So that means you've got an aggressive defense, and now you've got the players to put behind it. And so I expect them to continue to do well. But Miami can do a lot of Miami things, like Mario Cristobal's performance last year. So let's just put that out there. For number 2, the only reason I'm gonna put a caveat on this. I think I'm gonna put where I think UCF is in the pantheon of Florida defensive football right now, and where it will be by the end of the season, or could be by the end of the season. I think Florida State is number 2, again, for the same reasons I just mentioned. I do think UCF is number 3 at the start of the season, just simply because you know what? I'm going to back that up. I'm going to say UF is number 3, just simply because you ranked above us last season, and we gotta prove it, right? So that puts us at number 4. However, where I think we'll end the season will be a little bit different. I do think Miami will probably be number 1 to end the season. I think UCF could vie for number 2 based on what we've brought in and what this defense can do. To your point, we could not, and that's what Gus has been screaming about in local media for literally 4 or 5 months, is we could not stop the pass rush, or the running game. So because we could not stop the running game, we really boned up on that, and the defensive backs were fine already. I think between the linebackers, defensive tackles that we have, and then the defensive ends, I think we really are going to compete, if not get that second spot. So Florida State, again, top 25 defense. It's hard to argue that, but you lose a lot of pieces. So we'll see where they shuffle out. So they'll be either 2 or 3. And Florida, I just don't know what to make of Florida. I can't really say, I can't really say with confidence, hey, this is the 4th best defense in the state, but I also can't say it's the 2nd best defense in the state. So I don't know where to put them. So for now, I'm going to say, until we show what it's going to be, I think Florida is number 4 for me at the end of the season as it stands right now.
Yeah, and sometimes you just got to see it. Sometimes you just don't know. Like when you have a lot of new pieces, you just don't know. I mean, I remember years ago I said that it's potential equals production. If that potential turns into production, we'll be great. If it doesn't, we're not going to be great. So sometimes you just got to see it. And I will say Miami does have a defensive returning production only down at 53%. So they did lose quite a bit on that defense. But the thing is, they've recruited well. So they have talent coming in. It's just young, maybe inexperienced talent. But that's going to do it for the defensive show for this episode of 4th and Florida. Make sure you guys go get up to speed on the offenses from the last episode we did. We will link it at the end of this video to make it easier for you guys to find. Also, hit the like and subscribe button because you're not going to want to miss the one next week. We're going to get into the schedules. We're going to do some win-loss predictions. That's definitely going to be a fun one because I'm sure there's going to be a little bit of disagreement there. Maybe a little bit of shade throwing going on there.
UCF's going undefeated. What are you talking about?
Right. We're going to have Three
we have
teams
a hard
going 12 and
schedule?
0 on here. Yeah, Florida's got that easy schedule, so they should win all their games. We might have Miami at 0 and 12 and 3 schools sitting at 12 and 0. So it's going to be interesting. It's going to be a fun episode. Make sure you guys like and subscribe to Fourth and Florida. Tell a friend about it if they're a fan of college football in the state of Florida, because we got some shows coming up that you guys are not going to want to miss. So we appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will catch you on the next one. That's going to be it for Fourth and Florida.
Go Knights!
Go
Go
Noles!
Gators.